What's up, NFL fans? Welcome to another episode of Four Down Territory. I'm your host, Luke Easterling, alongside Doug Farrar, as always, author of The Genius of Desperation, a must-have book for all you X's and O's fans out there who love the game of football. Doug, it's fantastic stuff, man. I'm going to plug it every time I get a chance here. But your book is great.
By the way, I'm doing this because it was just announced today, Monday, that there's a new Metallica album coming out next year, and there's a new single around and about, and I'm just terrifically excited. But yeah, back to football.
Yes. I mean, that's fantastic. Your book is fantastic. What's not fantastic is what's happening in Denver right now, especially with that offense, right? Sunday, 23-10 loss to the Carolina Panthers, another one of the worst teams in the league, and you get beat by 2 scores. And the defense has had it, right? Veteran defensive lineman Mike Purcell, he's going over to Wilson right in the middle of the game in front of the cameras. He's letting him have it. He's eviscerating him in front of everybody. I mean, it's obvious what Denver needs to do at head coach, right? Nathaniel Hackett is not the guy. It's not worked out very well. But in terms of Wilson, that feels like a much harder fix, right? That 5-year, $245 million contract extension they gave him after the trade with Seattle, I mean, they're in dead salary cap hell basically until 2026. How in the world do they fix this situation, Doug?
Well, yeah, I love that Nathaniel Hackett said after the game, I didn't see it. It was happening right next to you. And then Wilson said, me and Mike were on the same page. Okay, Russ.
Of what book, Russ?
Not that I know anything about any Seattle defensive players having similar problems with Wilson back when he was playing better. I don't know anything about that. But yeah. The cap numbers are just they're stuck. So they have to fix this. And I look at what is happening in Jacksonville with Trevor Lawrence.
Right.
And I know that Russ wanted to go to Denver because in Hackett, he thought he had a guy who wouldn't tell him what to do. Wilson is the kind of player, I know this, who needs to be coached hard. And you look at what Doug Peterson is doing with Trevor Lawrence and all those fourth down plays, their win over the Ravens on Sunday. Peterson is a guy who knows how to run an offense, knows how to create an offense, knows how to coach his quarterbacks the way they need to be coached. I think the only hope for the Broncos and their new ownership group is to replace Hackett with a head coach who, A, has that successful offensive background, and B, will coach Wilson as hard as he needs to be coached, which is very hard. One reason, and so the sort of yes man, we're going to work together thing, the kumbaya stuff, out of here. It clearly doesn't work. And I know you're going to bring up the compensation issue, which I get. But I think if I'm that new ownership group and I just paid $4 billion, billion with a capital B for this team, yep, I'm going all out. I want a Sean Payton. I want someone of that level who has the skins on the wall and the history to be able to tell Wilson what to do and have it be taken seriously. Other than that, the cap hits, I mean, this is like a $100 million cap hit next year. They are stuck. They will not make the play. They haven't made the playoffs since they won the Super Bowl in 2015. They've had all these quarterback problems.
Yep.
It's going to be another 4 years of this unless they fix it. So, genius of desperation, here you are. You're desperate. Go get a Sean Payton. Go get someone at that level. I don't think a middle-tier guy, a former offensive coordinator who's never been a head coach, never won a Super Bowl, never developed a Drew Brees, who's one of Wilson's idols. I think outside of that, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I love the idea of Payton. I really do. I think that would be exactly what they need and maybe really their only option that fits the criteria that you've kind of set out there, right? If they want to check all those boxes, I feel like Payton's really the only guy who's going to be available and going to be able to do that, right? The problem is, like you said, the compensation. Everything, not only are they stuck with Wilson's contract, everything they gave up, all those early draft picks over the next couple of years to get him, what do they have left to trade the Saints? Sean Payton's under contract in New Orleans for the next year. Same thing we went through with Tom Brady, right? With everybody talking about, the Bucs are going to trade Brady and he wants to go elsewhere. He's under contract this year for the Bucs no matter what. So even if he stayed retired or wanted to go somewhere else, the Bucs would have had to trade him. It's a similar situation with the Saints. I think obviously a team like Denver would be the ideal situation for them. I think the Saints, if they're going to trade his rights at all, you'd want to trade him obviously out of the division, out of the conference if you can, and Denver presents them a perfect opportunity to do that. But, I mean, they have all the leverage, right? There's no, they don't lose anything if they don't trade him at all and he just stays retired for another year. So I don't know that it would bring their price down much, if at all, because they're dealing him to an AFC team. But again, like we said earlier, that might be the only fix. So they might, be able to have Denver in a situation where they can leverage that and get what they want from it. But again, now you're mortgaging even more of the future in draft picks that this team needs. They've got some nice pieces in place here, but they're going to need
their
those
defense
picks.
is fine. And their defensive coordinator, by the way, is going to be head coach in the next couple of years. That guy's really good. But yeah. And yeah, I mean, the Broncos with one move like eliminated all their leverage for the next half decade. I've never seen anything like it.
Yep. Well, I've never seen anything like what's going on with the Jets, right? We have a number 2 pick overall just 2 years ago in Zach Wilson, really a year ago. And it hasn't worked out very well, right? He got benched last week. And here comes Mike White, former USF Bull, right? I got to rep my alma mater there. Wasn't there for too long, but went to Western Kentucky, did some good things there. But Mike White shows up and balls out, right? Robert Saleh, after the game, said he made the easy things look easy. And when you play the Chicago Bears, that's kind of what you're hoping for. But 31-10, the day he had, the stats he put up after what the Jets have dealt with from that position throughout the season, and especially the week before against New England, I mean, this is a relief for them, right? To see a quarterback who can take the layups, who can take the easy things and make them look easy, like Saleh said. You know, after Wilson had the yips basically to the point where he couldn't even complete a screen pass.
Literally couldn't.
Just couldn't do it. So I think the question at this point isn't whether or not Wilson will see the field again this season. I think the question now is, and I know we've talked a little bit about this before, whether or not the Jets should move on completely from a guy who, again, just a year ago was the number 2 overall pick in the draft and really just start over at quarterback.
Well, I think when you look at and yes, bad defense by the Bears because that's kind of who they are. But,
right.
You know, we talked about the injury-depleted offensive line and the receivers aren't really that great. And you saw, like, okay, you know, even without Breece Hall, who's out for the rest of the season, that offense under Mike LaFleur, brother of Matt LaFleur, who's not happy in Green Bay right now, that offense works, and it works really well, and it works at multiple levels. So you remember Luke, draft wire guy, when the Arizona Cardinals selected Josh Rosen with a 10th overall pick in the 2018 draft and came back the next year to select Kyler Murray with the 1st overall pick in 2019?
Josh is our guy, Doug. Josh is our guy.
Josh, well, there are dozens of us.
He was for a little bit.
Josh Allen Hyde. The only hindrance I see possibly is that with the Rosen-Murray transition, they brought in Cliff Kingsbury, and everyone knew Cliff wanted Kyler Murray. Right. So that, boom. Robert Saleh, GM Joe Douglas, they were at the, they pushed the red button for Zach Wilson. So if they can eliminate the sunk cost fallacy and not try and spackle over a big mistake, which it turned out to be, I think you've got a pretty nice quarterback class. Guys like Michael Penix of Washington, I know we've both written about coming out of nowhere.
Yep.
I think you move on, you get anything you can get for him. If you can get a 7th round pick and a pack of big league chew, you go for it.
Yeah, I mean, when we talked about this last week, right, it wasn't even as bad as Wilson played. He wouldn't have been benched if it wasn't for the press conference, right? It's about the accountability, the fact that you have
the utter lack of accountability as a quarterback. Can't have it.
Not only you, what did you do? You said something or wrote something where there was a statement that if you can play poorly or you can be obnoxious, but you can't be both, right? So
you can be terrible or you can be obnoxious, but you can't be both. You can have a nice 10-year career in the NFL as a terrible backup quarterback. But the guys who are terrible and obnoxious, where are they?
They can't. And again, Wilson, the reason it's not just we can keep him around and if he develops, that's great. I think the message is the same message Robert Saleh sent when he benched him, which is that, hey, that type of attitude that, even when I play poorly, I'm not going to take responsibility for that publicly. And I'm not going to admit that obviously I cost us this game and wasted a defensive performance. That's the kind of stuff you just don't want in your locker room. You're not going to be able to look the rest of the team, the rest of the players in the eye and say, hey, I'm doing everything we can to build a culture here. If that's the guy you're kind of letting hang around with a shot at like you said, the most important position in the game and on your team. So I think, like you said, their only hope at this point is to hope that another team sees the same things they saw on the positive side in Wilson going into that draft, the arm talent, the potential, and some of the ridiculous plays he did make. And again, I said this in my scouting report going into that draft, where if you watched all of Wilson's best plays, you might think he should go number 1 easy. And if you watch all his worst plays, you might wonder if he's draftable at all. And so right. If you can convince a team that all of those good things and that talent and that potential is still there because he's still young, he's still got a couple years of his rookie deal plus the 5th-year option if you want it. if you can get anything for this guy and move on clean and get some kind of compensation and remove that, again, that attitude from the locker room, I feel like that's what you have to do. Speaking of complex quarterback situations, if you will, we're gonna go to Cleveland next. You know it was coming. Deshaun Watson has been cleared from his suspension after the multiple sexual assault allegations, right? He served that suspension. He is now eligible to return to the team. All indications are that he will start this week against his former team, the Houston Texans. But really,
not that the NFL did an 11-game suspension to set that up or anything.
No, definitely not on purpose at all. That's not something they would do for sure. But honestly, man, in terms of what's happened on the field for the Browns so far, what about Jacoby Brissett and what he's quietly been doing for this team over the last few weeks, culminating obviously in an overtime win over Tom Brady and the Bucs on Sunday, where they score a touchdown right before the end of regulation to tie it. They score the touchdown at the end of overtime to win it. I mean, again, he's been in the league since 2016, but he's really starting to have this Geno Smith kind of come out of nowhere season, right? And this seems like something he's kind of, you paid attention to what Jacoby has been saying all year. He's been very confident that he could be this kind of player and that he could do this for this team. I mean, can he be that guy for another team? Obviously, we talked about the Russell Wilson scenario and what that deal has kind of, made the Broncos have to deal with for the next few years. They're locked into that no matter what. The Browns are in a similar situation with what they've given Deshaun Watson. So obviously, Jacoby
fully guaranteed. Yeah.
Right. If he wants to be a starter in this league, it can't be in Cleveland. So who is the team in 2023 and beyond where he can go have that type of resurgence like Geno Smith has, but for a longer term?
Yeah, and you say now he could be the next Geno Smith, and people think you're nuts. I wrote an extensive tape piece about Brissett today, Monday. Who would have thought this about Geno Smith last year when he was Wilson's backup in Seattle?
Who would have thought it in the preseason when he was supposed to compete with Drew Lock?
Drew Lock, yeah. Oops. Who the Broncos probably just should have kept. So the first 6 weeks of the season, Brissett was kind of what he had always been, backup level guy, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like I said, if you're a good guy, and he's a good guy, you can be in the league for 10 years at that level. And then the light went on, and it's all of a sudden throwing under pressure, throwing past the sticks, being less deliberate and more willing to pull the trigger and make the throw. Mm-hmm. I saw a different guy, and that's kind of what happened with Smith in Seattle. He got in the right situation. His teammates love him. I mean, it was almost a period of mourning after the Bucs game. I'm reading the transcripts, and I'm like, these guys do not want him out of there. They really don't. John Johnson, the safety defensive captain, talked about how much they love him. I mean, love, the word love. You don't hear that a lot in the locker room. Right. Brissett deserves better than what he's getting in this game, and I think he will get that opportunity as a free agent as the new league year begins, because if I can figure out in 3 hours of watching tape and writing a piece that Brissett has turned a corner, I'm thinking some NFL teams will figure it out too.
Yeah, it's funny when you mention the way the players rally around that, and you talk about it with Mike White, you talking about it now with Jacoby Brissett. A Knight's Tale is like the most underrated movie of all time. And that scene at the end where obviously he's been like arrested because he's, been impersonating a noble or whatever. And the prince kind of lets him go. And he's like, hey, your men love you. And if I knew nothing else about you, that would be enough. That's kind of how it feels with these situations, right? When you see these comments from these teammates and these talking about their quarterbacks, the fact that their guys in that locker room obviously will step up for them and say, hey, this is our guy. If you're another team who knows that guy's going to be available, that's the guy you want to go get. And obviously that's going to hit home for me here because I watched it very closely Sunday against the Bucs. The Bucs had a 17-10 lead. They squander it at the end of regulation, and we could go on and on about the coaching decisions that led to that. But if you just focus on what Brissett did to get his team in position to win that game, why don't the Bucs want him next year? Tom Brady's not under contract. Obviously, they're going to have to jump through some salary cap hoops, something that really no team has been better at than them over the last few years. So it's going to take some work, and it obviously depend on what market materializes for Brissett's services in the offseason. But the Bucs are going to have plenty of pieces still in place to be at least a contender in the NFC South, right? Which isn't saying much, but it still comes with a home playoff game. If you win that, the same boat they're going to be in this year, right? They could have a losing record and win that division and still get into the playoffs. So if I'm the Bucs and I'm looking for the type of quarterback who's going to still give me a chance to make some noise and at least get in the door of the playoffs the next 2-3 years, I don't know why Brissett's not at the top of their list. To wrap us up this week, Doug, Sunday night football, fantastic game, right? It ended up being very, very entertaining, especially if you didn't have a dog in that fight. But the Packers end up still falling to 4-8, 40-33 loss to the now 10-1 Philadelphia Eagles, which is just wild to me. But late in the game, Aaron Rodgers is replaced by Jordan Love, right? He gets injured. He already had the thumb injury. Now he's got a rib injury. Makes us think, though, right? You got Rodgers, who signed a 3-year, $150 million extension just this past March, right? Mm-hmm. But the Packers only have Love under club control for one more season. He's been sitting waiting for his turn, and it just hasn't come because Rodgers is still there. Obviously, they could pick up his fifth-year option for Love because he was a first-round pick that they traded up for. But is it time now to see what the Packers maybe could get for Rodgers in a trade? Is that a conversation that needs to happen right now, especially, and I know it's just one quarter of play basically, but with the way Jordan Love looks like, and you want to talk about things that teammates have said, wasn't it just a few weeks ago that Devondre Campbell was on a show talking about how Jordan Love is a starting quarterback in this league and singing his praises? That stuff matters. Is now the time, right? I know it's lining right up with about when the Rodgers Favre move happened, right, due to Favre's injury and Rodgers taking over the following year. Is that where we're at now with the Packers situation?
Well, it's where we might be. And I did a preseason tape piece on Love, and you could see the development. I mean, there are still, holes in his game, but he's come along. The first thing the Packers need to do is find themselves a new defensive coordinator because the second thing they should do is just float the idea, see what's out there, see what would be available to the right price.
Have Adam Schefter do it right before the draft starts.
Yeah, the most obvious good fit would be the Las Vegas Raiders. I don't think that Josh McDaniels is all in on Derek Carr, who could be moved in such a deal. And, you get back with Devontae Adams. He would certainly have more weapons than he does in Green Bay. The offensive line, maybe a push. Rodgers has been playing through injuries all season. I don't think what we've seen this year is indicative of what he still can be.
For sure.
Maybe it's time for the Packers to move on. I wouldn't say absolutely. But if I'm Brian Gutekunst, if I'm their GM, the first thing I do is look for a new DC. The second thing I do is start to float the idea. Aaron Rodgers may be available. I'm not saying they should do it, but I am saying at this point it might be time. Because again, we get back to sunk cost fallacy. If you don't think Jordan Love is a guy, then okay, fine. You made a mistake. You kept him on the roster for 4 years. You don't pick up his fifth-year option. You move on. But if you think he's the guy, when are you going to do it? Are you going to sign him to a second contract when he's never played before outside of mop-up duty?
Yep.
At what point do you try and get 2 or 3 first-round picks to try and stabilize your team? And they have a lot of stabilizing to do, clearly. At what point do you pull the trigger on that? And I'm not saying it should be, but I'm saying if I were Gutekunst, I would at least explore what the possibilities could be.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And honestly, to call back to earlier in the show, and you mentioned that we were going to get here, why wouldn't the Jets be the perfect spot for this move to happen, right? You've got a team that's got
from one LaFleur to another.
Be fantastic, right? You've got the defenses in place. You've got a head coach in Robert Saleh, who I think is the guy. I think he's got that culture moving in the right direction. I think he is making the right moves. I think Joe Douglas overall has done a solid job in this past draft class. I think in particular, look at all those young weapons they have on offense. They, when Breece Hall comes back from the injury, you got Michael Carter, you've got the 2 running backs, kind of like you have in Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon there. But you've got Garrett Wilson, you've got, Elijah Moore, who needs the ball more. But you've got so many pieces in place. And honestly, their salary cap situation next year, it's not, fantastic. It's not the Bears, obviously. They don't have money to burn, but they could make enough moves to make it work and absorb that contract. Yeah. They can afford to, I think, give up the picks because they had so many in this past class that they already look like they've hit on. I think they're the team. I think they're the team where it could make sense for both parties. The Packers could get what they think they deserve for him, and I think he could make enough of a difference for that Jets team to immediately make them like Super Bowl contenders day one.
Yeah, well, I joke about from one LaFleur to another, but there are similar concepts. RPO heavy, boot action, a lot of motion, focusing on the run game as kind of a balanced attack because really the Packers have been better this year when they run the ball. So, yeah, that would be a very fascinating fit. Like I'm not saying the Packers should trade Aaron Rodgers. I'm saying it's a discussion I think they should have.
Well, I agree, and this is a discussion that we have definitely enjoyed. We enjoy it every week, Doug, breaking down these topics, and we thank you, the NFL fans, for tuning in every week. Once again, for Doug Farrar, I'm Luke Easterling, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everybody.